Let's go. I've always related to the mission of your Humanist Hub, the idea of a progressive life stance that without supernaturalism affirms our ability and responsibility to live ethical lives of personal fulfillment, aspiring to humanity's greater good.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is shown on over 30 cable stations from Maine to New York City and points west. How do you protest during our virus lockdown? What if the matter is life and death? That's the situation for families and friends of immigrants locked up in ICE detention centers. We're told that some of the cells hold 50 people packed together. That's dangerous for the immigrants and dangerous for the guards. A method of protest has been found. Protest from your closed car, either by yourself or with the people you're already being quarantined with. This is a protest at the federal building up in Hartford, trying to win freedom for immigrants locked up in Bristol County, Massachusetts. The action is called a honkathon.
Right now, with this crisis, it's more crucial to release anybody. These detention centers can become death camps, and we don't want more deaths. We don't want any more single victims of this crisis, and especially the crisis that we live in this country, the immigration crisis. This ICE machine that keeps criminalizing our people and sending people to death camps. Free them all! Free them all! Free them all! Free them all!
Free them all! Free them all! Free them all! Let's go.
Use this number to call Massachusetts Governor Charlie Baker to urge him to free people under ICE custody. Now some bad news and good news. I came across this article in the Havana Times. The journal is written by independent Cuban leftists, including writers from Cuba. It's edited in Nicaragua. The article is about the way the Ortega government is dealing with the virus in Nicaragua. A Spaniard who worked for an NGO wrote the piece. It included these words: "Far from closing borders, Nicaragua has received cruise ships with open arms. Instead of limiting events and crowds, they organize marches and multitudes to combat COVID-19. They tell the citizens to enjoy Easter week and put up posters with offers for the vacation. They even inaugurated a water park. They insist that the nation is prepared to receive tourists. Why are Nicaraguans putting up with this? In a word, fear. Recall 2018 popular opposition to President Ortega and his vice president wife. It was put down brutally with hundreds killed. Now the good news from the Gaza Strip, of all places. Mondoweiss held a webinar. I attended and learned that the terribly poor Gaza Strip is doing an excellent job containing the virus. Anyone entering the Strip is quarantined for 21 days. Any Palestinian who leaves, even for a few hours, knows that he or she will have to quarantine on return for 21 days. A few days ago, there were but 15 cases of the virus in the Gaza Strip, and these people are all in a specially converted hotel. No one is in intensive care, and no one has died. Impressive. Of course, all this can change on a dime. Gaza is densely populated and has been under different degrees of siege for 13 years. If the virus gets out into the general populace, it will spread like wildfire. Jewish Voice for Peace held a virtual rally. Some 500 participated on Zoom and 30,000 viewed it on Facebook. JVP is demanding an end to the siege. Palestinians from the West Bank were going to work in Israel with the permission of the PA. They were going to stay there in Israel all through the emergency period. The PA naturally expected that if any of the workers got sick, the Israelis would take care of him. However, when, as the New York Times wrote, after an ailing worker was unceremoniously dumped at a checkpoint by Israeli police, the PA changed its mind, and thousands now are returning to the West Bank. I saw photos of the unfortunate man. The Israelis did dump him as if he was a sack of garbage. And as Israeli cruelty shows few limits, on March 26th, a group of tents in the West Bank Jordan Valley that were meant to hold COVID-19 patients were torn down by Israelis. The tents and all the supplies were confiscated. Earth Day is coming up. 4 days of commemoration and action are being planned in Connecticut. On the other side, corporate interests and science deniers are rushing through projects that will ruin the climate while everyone's attention is focused on the virus. Hopefully, hundreds will join the virtual rally being planned for the 25th of April in the early afternoon. Go to peps.org for details after April 13th. Focus has to be on Governor Lamont. His environmental panel has approved one of the last permits needed for building a new fracked gas power plant in Killingly that will spew millions of tons of greenhouse gases into the air each year. Now, exclusive video of famed climate activist Naomi Klein speaking at Harvard University at the end of February. She was there to receive the Rushdie Award given out by a number of humanist organizations.
But first, please let me introduce to you Greg Epstein. He's the Harvard and MIT Humanist Chaplain. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller, Good Without God, What a Billion Non-Religious People Do Believe, and he's an all-around nice guy. So please join me in welcoming Greg.
Thank you, Casper. Thank you, Kazi and Adele, who you'll hear from in a minute, everybody. And Hacha students, you are the reason that the Humanist chaplaincy at Harvard has existed since it became the first ever chaplaincy serving humanist, atheist, agnostic, non-religious students at any university in the world over 40 years ago. My role as Humanist chaplain is to support and advise Harvard students, faculty, and staff who identify as humanist and non-religious. This award has existed as a collaboration between the chaplaincy and Hacha since back in 2007, when we presented our first annual award to Sir Salman Rushdie, the iconic writer, who braved years of threats to his life after his classic and deeply humane novel, The Satanic Verses, drew the ire of Iran's Ayatollah Khomeini for being insufficiently deferential to Islam in particular, religion in general. And we decided back then to call this annual award for lifetime achievement in infusing our culture with humanist values, the Rushdie Award. And it's been one of our most important events since then, with this amazing collection of honorees thus far. This being one of them, the late Carrie Fisher, we miss her, and among many, many others. Rushdie himself dubbed the original event that we held in this series Atheismus. This year's awardee will be introduced by Hacha co-presidents Kazi Chinda and Adele Goldenberg. But I just want to say I'm particularly proud that this year's award, like last year's when we honored writer and critic of extreme inequality Anand Giridharadas, is a way for many of us humanists and allies to reaffirm our resistance against the kind of plutocracy that we are witnessing on display across so many aspects of American politics today, really, not least of which you might find in our current presidential campaign. Of course, that statement, like my literal and proverbial RTs on Twitter, represents my opinion, not the Humanist chaplaincy as a whole, or even the Hacha students. I'll let them speak for themselves. But for myself, I don't mind mentioning that Harvard itself, of course, has all too often not only been a member of the world's club of plutocracy, but even the president. And so this is an important conversation that we're going to have tonight. Naomi Klein, you are an extraordinarily powerful antidote to that sort of tendency in contemporary politics. You're a true fighter for democracy, for knowledge, for wisdom, for ordinary human beings, for the earth. I should mention lately for Bernie Sanders. You inspire me so deeply. One of the people on the earth today whose work most inspires me personally, and I'm just so grateful that you're here tonight, that we can honor you. So I want to introduce two other people that inspire me, our co-presidents Adele and Kazi. And you'll formally introduce Ms. Klein and present her with our award, and then acceptance speech, student-moderated Q&A. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. Hi, everyone. My name is Adele.
And I'm Kazi.
We're the co-presidents of Hacha, Harvard College's community of humanists, atheists, and agnostics. We are honored to be here tonight to introduce this year's winner of our annual Rushdie Award, Naomi Klein. Naomi Klein has a lifelong history of promoting humanist values through social advocacy and activism. She has done this in a multitude of forms. as a New York Times bestselling author, as an award-winning journalist, and as the inaugural Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair in Media, Culture, and Feminist Studies at Rutgers University.
Among Clyde's many, many award-winning books, and we've got a list, are The Battle for Paradise, Puerto Rico Takes on the Disaster Capitalists, No is Not Enough, Resisting the New Shock Politics, and Winning the World We Need. This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus the Climate, The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, and of course, No Logo. Films based on these works have been chosen as official and prize-winning entries at leading film festivals around the world. Klein's most recent work, On Fire, The Burning Case for a Green New Deal, tackles the climate crisis in a novel way. Hailed by critics as a clarion call to courage and ambition, the book is an impassioned and evidence-based plea for a Green New Deal that would avert climate catastrophe while creating a more just and equitable society. Published in September 2019, the book was quickly an instant New York Times bestseller and the #1 Canadian bestseller.
The award we are presenting to Ms. Klein tonight is inscribed with a quote from the memoirs of Simone de Beauvoir. I tore myself away from the safe comfort of certainties through my love for truth, and truth rewarded me. It further reads, the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard, the Harvard Community of Humanists, Atheists, and Agnostics, and the American Humanist Association proudly present the 14th Annual Outstanding Lifetime Achievement Award in Cultural Humanism. And now, please join us in welcoming our 2020 honoree, Naomi Klein, to the stage.
Thank you. Adele and Cassie, that was so kind. And Greg Epstein, thank you so much for having me here. It's nice to meet a Twitter friend in person. I want to thank everybody at the Humanist Hub and the student-led committee for selecting me. And I noticed that this sort of looks like fire, doesn't it? Thank you for the matching. I'm all about fire these days. I usually wear a little bit of red. We'll come to that. This is indeed a beautiful honor and a wonderful tradition to be a part of. It's also my first Lifetime Achievement Award, and though I'm not yet 50, I plan to use it as sanctified permission to do absolutely nothing for the rest of my life. Just like margaritas for breakfast for the next 50 years or so. About 25 years ago, when I was researching No Logo, which is a book that some of you may have been forced to read on some course list or other, I was planning a trip to the Philippines to investigate the factories that were making so many of the products that fill our lives and often made under what turned out to be abhorrent conditions. And I knew nothing about the Philippines, and before that trip, I called up a local labor organizer. She worked with domestic workers in Toronto, and she was from the Philippines. And I asked her for some help, as we journalists do, prevail on the kindness of strangers. And I asked her for some help making contacts in the Philippines. She met me on a Saturday morning and spent about 3 hours educating me. She made lists and charts and gave me a crash course in 50 years of revolutionary history in the Philippines. And at the end of, which has a very deep revolutionary history, at the end of our talk, I thanked her for giving up so much of her weekend helping an unknown young journalist, especially because I knew how hard she worked as an organizer during the week. And she said something that I have never forgotten. She said, solidarity isn't just my job, it's my hobby too. And in truth, that has been the case for me too ever since. And so I'm very fortunate to have as a partner Avi Lewis, who shares my values and my passion and didn't mind that I wanted to spend a good portion of our honeymoon visiting Nike factories in Indonesia. We are both very fortunate to have a 7-year-old son who is a militant animal rights activist. And he just wrote a punk song a couple of weeks ago called North American Shutdown. The lyrics are, I'm not going to try to sing it because I don't have an electric guitar. He plays my husband's electric guitar. But basically it goes, what do we want? A Green New Deal. When do we want it? Now. What'll we do if we don't get it? And then there's like a really long guitar, messy electric guitar things, and then it just goes, North American shutdown. No, it's North American because he was born in Canada and now lives in the United States. And when this general strike happens, he doesn't want anybody feeling left out. So this social justice thing isn't just a job, it is a hobby for all of us. So I want to talk about humanism a little bit, of course. We are humans, and this is an award celebrating qualities that we have attributed to that fact without consulting any other animals. There was a time when this idea wouldn't have given me pause. I've always related to the mission of your Humanist Hub, the idea of a progressive life stance that without supernaturalism affirms our ability and responsibility to live ethical lives of personal fulfillment, aspiring to humanity's greater good. I suppose that I have interpreted that in my life to mean the duty to defend the rights of the most vulnerable of humans, whether it's those workers in those sweatshops, or on the borders, or in war zones, or in prisons, or on the front lines of climate disruption. Some might call this a willingness to fight for people that we don't know. And I still deeply believe in that. But here's the catch, and I know this might be heretical in humanist circles. The deeper I delve into the roots of our climate crisis, the reasons why we are locked into a system that is willingly currently torching our one and only home, the more resistant I become to aligning my life's mission exclusively with the interests of our particular species. Not because I've lost my willingness to fight for my fellow humans, I feel that commitment more than ever. But at the same time, I'm less sure of the value of elevating our humanness above other life forms. I fight for humans, and I continue to be committed to that. But I wonder whether I want to say that I fight just for humans. What about our fellow orcas? What about our sibling cedar trees? More and more, what I feel like I'm fighting for is life, all of life, human and non-human, flora and fauna, mighty and microscopic, not one species, but the whole web of it. As I enter my slacker years, the great expanse of Margarita Mondays that you have gifted me, I find myself increasingly resistant to the separations that we have erected between the life forms. I fear that this makes me a bad humanist, but no, you cannot have your trophy back. It's too late for that. So bear with me. I'm not denying that there is something undeniably unique and worth celebrating about being human, that there are things that we can do that other species can't, and that those things come with a mandate, indeed, a moral responsibility. But maybe all species have qualities that are also worth celebrating. As humans, this is something we used to know. We told many stories about it. Since our ancient ancestors began spinning myths about the origins of life, there have been stories about the unique roles played by particular species. In many indigenous cosmologies, every creature, from ravens to squirrels to whales, plays a particular role in the drama and web of life, including we two-legged, big-brained mammals. But in around 350 BC, in ancient Greece, philosophers started thinking about this in a markedly more hierarchical way. For Aristotle, the goal was no longer to understand where Homo sapiens' particular gifts fit in an interconnected and interdependent web of life. It was explicitly to establish a system of ranking among life forms, with humans alone possessing the power of reason. This fascination with ranking only deepened over the centuries, reaching new levels of intricacy when it merged with Christianity and the hierarchies of the supernatural. With help from St. Augustine, this logic faithfully produced the great chain of being, that intricate layer cake ranking all life forms in descending order from God. According to that rigid vertical ladder, humans were just below angels, but squatted squarely on top of all other animals who themselves were divided into their own hierarchies of upper and lower orders. All of them, of course, ranked higher than on that rigid ladder than poor plants, trees, rocks, and minerals, and finally, the creatures dwelling in hell, so close to those rocks and minerals. Now, once the ranking of life had begun, it proved hard to stop. Husbands ranked closer to God than wives, wives higher than children, male children higher than female ones, and very often this system of ranking life became a rationale for violence. Violence against the natural world, which was cast as our dominion to dominate, a worldview that laid the ground for the profitable depletion and pollution of nature without limit. Because if trees and rocks and mountains and rivers were rungs below you in the chain of being, rather than, say, the foundations of life upon which our own life depends, then it is your literal God-given right to dig them all up, chop them all down, and burn them at will. And this rigid hierarchy has also been the prime rationale for violence against non-human animals who were ranked as lower-order soulless beasts. And profoundly connected to this, it has provided the rationale for genocidal violence against our fellow humans. After all, the easiest way to justify stealing another's land or labor is to unilaterally demote them in the great chain of being, declaring that they share more in common with animals or insects than with civilized men. If you want to do something despicable to another human, lock them up, lock them out, grab what's theirs, the most overused trick in the book is to say that they are not human at all, but rather animals, an argument that only works if you have fully severed your relationships with the rest of the natural world. We now know that the entire premise of the chain of being was absurd. Those older cosmologies, the ones that saw not ladders but spirals or webs of life, and told us that animals and plants were our relatives, are actually far closer to scientific truth. We share 60% of our DNA with cats, 95% with chimpanzees, and it turns out that trees, one of the life forms ranked lowest on the great chain of being, have communication networks so intricate they put our digital information webs to shame.
That's our program for today. Keep safe, people. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.